the same disregard for integrity and facts when it comes to taxation. Here are the facts. More Scottish workers pay more income tax than those elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Yet John Swinney falsely accuses me of misleading Parliament when I state this hard fact, and then he doesn't correct the record. Now, I know that the SNP's culture of dishonesty will never change, but does John Swinney at least agree that Scots are paying too much tax?
First Minister.
First things first, Presiding Officer, the arrangements in relation to the scrutiny of ministerial conduct have been strengthened by the arrangements that I have put in place. And the system of independent advisers being able to explore and examine cases at their own volition, without reference from me, has only been provided by the actions that I have taken as First Minister to set the highest tests for accountability and scrutiny that have to be in place at all times. So
let's hear the First Minister.
That is only possible because of the arrangements that I have put in place as First Minister. And in relation to the substantive point that Russell Findlay puts to me, the Independent Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts show that most Scottish taxpayers are expected to pay less income tax this year, 2025-26, than they would if they lived in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I'm happy to put that point on the record in Parliament today.
Russell Findlay.
So he's strengthened accountability by dishing out a get-out-of-jail-free card to all his SNP pals. That's one way of doing it. Taxes are too high in Scotland. Scots are forced, not asked, to pay £1.7 billion extra a year through SNP income tax rises. Yet they see a wasteful government utterly incapable of fixing public services that only get worse, as demonstrated once again today with the revelation that bed blocking costs the NHS up to £500 million every single year. The SNP's list of costly failures is truly endless. Struggling workers, families and businesses, they all deserve a break. That's why in next week's budget we're calling on John Swinney to reduce the crippling financial burden by cutting income tax. So will he do so?
First Minister.
In relation to public services, the recent data that came out on Tuesday demonstrates that for the 6th month in a row, long waits in our National Health Service are falling. In some circumstances, they have fallen by 30% since the start of the financial year. From the plan that I put in place, the resources I put in place, long waits coming down just as I promised they would do for patients the length and breadth of our country. So the key point I would say to Russell Findlay is that the investment we are making in public services is delivering the better outcomes for people in our country. Now, the delayed discharge report from Audit Scotland today demonstrates that there is a necessity for us to work collaboratively with local authorities to tackle that issue, and that good work is highlighted in the Audit Scotland report. Of course, this government recognised the need for that intervention with the National Care Service proposals, but the Conservatives and others would not support those proposals when they came to Parliament.
Thank you.
And the
Let's hear one another.
And the last thing I will say, to Mr Findlay about his tax cut proposals is that, yes, his proposals involve cutting tax, but they also involve cutting public spending by £1 billion, and he never answers that question.
Russell Findlay.
When it comes to the state of the NHS in Scotland under the SNPs, John Swinney's selective statistics do not cut it. Patients know the reality. They see the reality with their own eyes. John Swinney thinks that he can take more and more from workers and businesses, and at the same time spend more and more on benefits. The SNP's annual benefits bill of £7 billion is on course to reach £10 billion. That's £10 billion a year. State benefits are a vital safety net for those in need, but this is unaffordable, It's unfair and it's unsustainable. And the only way that John Swinney can pay for this is by hiking taxes even more. But there is another way. We believe that workers should keep more of their hard-earned money.
Let's hear Mr.
And this
Findlay.
will help to increase prosperity by growing the economy. John Swinney could cut people's taxes in this budget by tackling the out-of-control benefits bill, but does he have the bravery to do so?
First Minister.
Since the start of this financial year, new outpatient waits over 52 weeks have fallen by 31%. Since the start
Minister,
of this...
First Minister, just a moment. I'm very conscious of the number of members who've advised me they'd like to put questions today. That will be made far more likely if we can hear one another. First Minister.
So, President Officer, just so that colleagues can hear my remarks, since the start of this financial year, new outpatient waits over 52 weeks have fallen by 31%. Since the start of this financial year, inpatient and day case waits over 52 weeks have fallen by 28.6%. Every single month falls in the levels of these waiting lists. So that is the plans that I put in place, delivering patient benefits for real people in our society. Now, when it comes to social security investment, what this government has done has invested in measures such as the Scottish Child Payment, which means that child poverty is falling in Scotland when it's rising in other parts of the United Kingdom, and we have child poverty levels that are at 30-year lows in Scotland as a consequence of our intervention. Now, I know that Mr Findlay doesn't care about child poverty. I know that the implications of Mr Findlay's policies are to reduce support for vulnerable people in our society, and as a consequence, more children will be subjected to poverty by the callous actions of the Conservative Party. Well, we will have none of that on these benches. We will stand beside the families of Scotland, reducing poverty and making sure that there is opportunity for all within Scotland.
Question number 2, Anas Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, Audit Scotland's report on delayed discharge is damning and should shame John Swinney and the SNP government. It reveals that in the last year, over 720,000 bed days were lost to delayed discharge. That is almost 750,000 clinically unnecessary days in hospital in a single year for patients cleared to leave, but many trapped because they can't get a care package. 720,000. That is nearly 2,000 bed days lost every single day. And that is the real-life consequence of almost 20 years of John Swinney and the SNP. So isn't this just 720,000 more reasons why Scotland needs a new government and new leadership?
First Minister.
Sir, I welcome the report from Audit Scotland because it highlights the importance of tackling the issue of delayed discharge, which has been a priority for this government and which is recognised in the Audit Scotland report. Now, when we look at the substance of the delayed discharge issue, Audit Scotland highlight the complexities involved, but they also highlight that delayed discharge only affects 3% of patients within our health system. So 97% of patients leave hospital without delay. Now, there are complex challenges that have to be addressed, which is why I welcome the observation in the Audit Scotland report that Scotland's population health framework, the Health and Social Care Service Renewal Framework and the NHS Operational Improvement Plan offer an opportunity to make progress with a common focus on prevention. So what that means is that Audit Scotland are recognising the arrangements this government has put in place to work with our partners to address the substance of the delayed discharge problem, and that will be my priority in taking forward this activity.
Anas Sarwar.
Officer, that was a pathetic answer from a First Minister who promised to eradicate delayed discharge a decade ago and proves he's out of touch and out of time. And this is the damning consequence of his 20 years in government that he has to own. 720,000 bed days lost in 1 year. the SNP's failure to deal with delayed discharge cost taxpayers and our NHS over £440 million a year. Hundreds of millions wasted while waiting lists remain too long and staff feel unsupported. Audit Scotland warned the system cannot function as intended. No grip from the centre, no clear accountability, no effective oversight, and all this has human consequences. Some patients have been forced to wait more than 6 months in hospital after they've been medically cleared to leave. So why is John Swinney so willing to dismiss not just the financial cost of his failure, but the human cost of this SNP government too?
First Minister.
One of the important points at the heart of the Audit Scotland report is the need for there to be the deepest level of integration between health and social care services in Scotland. And the Government tried to do something about that by the work that we brought forward on the National Care Service, and the Labour Party would not support us despite a policy commitment to support
Let's
the
hear
National
one
Care
another.
Service. Now, what that means is that the Labour Party say one thing in one context and another thing in a different context. And what's my evidence for that? Well, my evidence for that is on Monday, Anas Sarwar claimed that in Scotland, waiting lists continue to rise. Yesterday, Anas Sarwar admitted that waiting lists are coming down in Scotland. So between Monday and Wednesday, Mr Sarwar doesn't understand if waiting lists are going up or coming down. What it means is that Mr Sarwar just simply makes it up as he goes along, and the people of Scotland are seeing through that.
Anas Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney is not living in the real world. He thinks Scotland's problems are because of the opposition.
Let's hear Mr Sarwar.
Not a man that's been in government for 20 years. And in just 4 months, Scotland can get rid of this useless SNP government, because Scotland's NHS is not safe in John Swinney's hands. He ignores the evidence.
Let's hear Mr Sarwar.
He ignores the evidence, he ignores the experts, he ignores the patients sharing their heartbreaking stories, and he ignores the doctors and the nurses on the front line. So will he ignore the damning words from Alec Neil, his colleague for more than 20 years and a former SNP Health Secretary, who said, "A friend of mine waited 3 hours for an ambulance and then 33 hours on a trolley at Ayr Hospital last week before being allocated a bed." The First Minister's claim that the Scottish NHS has turned a corner is rubbish. Scotland's hospitals are in deep crisis and need urgent action now. He's right. John Swinney's talking rubbish, isn't he?
First Minister.
Well, I come back to the information that I set out to Mr Findlay a moment ago, that when I set out the plans in the first budget under my leadership as First Minister to tackle long waits in Scotland, that has resulted in a 31% reduction in new outpatient waits and a 28.6% reduction in inpatient and day case waits. Sustained progress over a 6-month period. So that says to me that the National Health Service is making the recovery it needs to make from the COVID pandemic that affected us all. Now, Mr Sarwar is very good at dishing out his advice. 18 months ago, he advised the people of Scotland to elect Labour MPs, and yesterday he described those Labour MPs as idiotic. That tells us all we need to know, that Anas Sarwar is not living in the real world, that what he said to the people of this country 18 months ago to vote Labour has proved to be a disaster, because he's now describing those Labour MPs as idiots. I think what the people of Scotland are now realising is that Anas Sarwar offers nothing in new leadership to Scotland, and that what the SNP will do is get on with delivering for the people of Scotland, and that's what we're doing just now.
I appreciate that we don't work in a library, but we do have to treat one another with some more courtesy and respect. I want those gathered to hear what is being said by those who have been called to speak. Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the First Minister is playing down the problem of delayed discharge, but he should tell that to everyone waiting for an ambulance or waiting in a corridor or who've had their operation cancelled this morning because our hospitals are full. In November 2024, 62-year-old Margaret McGill was rushed to hospital. She'd become paralysed from the waist down with a rare spinal condition known as cauda equina. They think it's caused by lifting both her disabled son and the patients in her care as an auxiliary nurse and then as a social care worker herself. Margaret has been in hospital, first in Raigmore, now in Wick, for over 400 days. The family home was adapted and ready for her last April. The ramps were installed, doors widened, a whole extension's been built. What's missing are the carers, the staff she needs to drop by to help her. So Margaret is still in hospital. Her husband, Cathal, told me this morning that she is a positive and vibrant woman, but she is struggling. She just wants to get out of hospital. So can the First Minister tell me, what is it going to take to get Margaret home?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry to hear the circumstances that Mr McGill is experiencing, but some of the steps that Mr Cole-Hamilton has outlined are positive steps with the adaptations that have been put in place in the family home to enable Mrs McGill to be able to come there. So there are practical steps being taken in the right direction, but the challenge is the availability of carers. And I acknowledge that is a difficulty in many areas of Scotland, but especially acute in rural areas where the working age population is not as large as we would want it to be. Hence why Mr Cole-Hamilton and I are probably agreed that we've got to have a constructive approach to migration issues to try to boost our rural population. Now, I know that there is a very active focus on meeting the social care challenges in the Highlands, and I'm very happy to receive details about the particular case and identify what further steps can be taken to assist in that respect.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, those adaptations in Margaret's home are of no use to her for every day that she remains stuck in that hospital. And the brutal irony of this story is that Margaret herself was a care worker. Throughout her career, she has offered support that is now unavailable to her. She should have been home within 14 weeks, but she's been in hospital now for 14 months. It's happening the length and breadth of the country. Scotland deserves better than this. That's why my party has made care a priority in our discussions over the Scottish budget. It's now been 10 years since Shona Robertson, as Health Secretary, promised to get rid of delayed discharge altogether. Yet 2,000 people are marooned in hospital every single day. It's a care bottleneck that means cancelled surgeries, endless waits in A&E, and ambulances stacking up outside hospitals. This morning, we learned that it's costing the NHS at least £1.2 million a day, but the cost to Margaret and people like her is incalculable. So can I ask the First Minister, when will the penny finally drop for the SNP that you cannot fix the crisis in our NHS until you've fixed care?
First Minister.
Well, I think that's been reflected by the budget decisions that we've taken to expand support for social care, which came in the budget that Mr Cole-Hamilton supported, which is the current financial year's budget that Mr Cole-Hamilton supported after negotiation. I welcome that negotiation with the government because we need to. The government doesn't have a majority. We need to work with others to agree the financial provisions. So that dialogue is essential to make sure social care can be adequately funded. Now, what the Audit Scotland report does, it highlights some of the complexity of cases that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me. It also highlights the challenges about recruitment, particularly in remote and rural areas, which I'm not disputing that at all. That's why I've taken steps to make it more practical and possible for people who come to this country to work in our care service, people who've been abandoned by the changes to care arrangements by the immigration rules of the United Kingdom government, where I've taken steps to make sure more of those individuals can work in our care service. And I give Mr Cole-Hamilton the assurance that where there are practical and pragmatic steps that we can take to do that, we will do exactly that.
Question number 4, Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to support those affected by fuel poverty in light of the recent rise in energy prices and their potential impact on the cost of living for households across Scotland.
First Minister.
President Officer, the Scottish Government delivers the strongest package of winter heating support available anywhere in the United Kingdom. We continue to use the powers available to raise incomes and improve energy efficiency, including increased funding for Warmer Homes Scotland, investing over £196 million in winter heating benefits and providing a further £1 million this year to expand energy bill debt advice services. However, the main levers for addressing fuel poverty, such as energy prices and market reform, are reserved. We have repeatedly called on the UK Government to introduce targeted bill discounts to reduce the number of households in fuel poverty by around 135,000.
Adam.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and I commend the measures outlined by the First Minister, and I'm proud that at a time when people are struggling, that this SNP government is providing the strongest package of winter support than anywhere else in the UK. The Labour Party promised to cut energy bills by £300, but households are nearly £200 worse off. Any politician from Scotland worth their salt should be demanding better for Scotland. And while the UK Government continues to deliver nothing but broken promises, does the First Minister agree that it is only through independence that we can prioritise Scotland's interests and actually reduce energy bills?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Karen Adam makes the very strong point that the people of Scotland were promised a reduction in their fuel bills by the Labour Government, and their fuel bills have gone up. Another broken promise from the Labour Government. And she's also right that in Scotland, an energy-rich country, constituents of Ms Adams and others are facing fuel poverty because the energy wealth of Scotland is not being deployed to benefit the people of Scotland. And the only way that can happen is with independence, and this party is going to deliver that.
Brief supplementary, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And this week, severe weather has seen the UK's power demand reach a 7-year high as households struggle to keep warm through the winter storms. Yet, in energy-rich Scotland, this power demand sits alongside skyrocketing energy bills as families pee through the nose to heat their homes. So does the First Minister agree with me that the sooner Scotland's energy is in the hands of Scotland's people, the better for lower bills, economic growth and meaningful community ownership?
Hopefully the First Minister will have heard that. I would ask those who are shouting from their seats to cease. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Audrey Nicholl makes the very important point that we live in an energy-rich country, but we also live in a country that is high in fuel poverty, and that's because of the decisions of the United Kingdom energy market. So Audrey Nicholl is absolutely right. The sooner these issues are in the hands of the people of Scotland, where we can make the energy wealth of Scotland work for the benefit of the people of Scotland, the sooner the better.
Question number 5, Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Police Scotland's figures showing a 10% increase in reported domestic abuse crimes over the past 12 months.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, domestic abuse is abhorrent and we must end it. Multiple factors lie behind this statistic, including a greater willingness of victims to report crimes, the justice system taking them seriously and pursuing action against the perpetrators, in most cases men. Our Equally Safe strategy sets out preventative actions to stop such violence from occurring in the first place, and our £21.6 million annual funding supports projects such as Equally Safe at School and Mentors in Violence Prevention, as well as building capability and capacity of services for their vital work to support survivors.
Pam Gossel.
I thank the First Minister for that response, but let's be clear here. Last year, 66,000 domestic abuse incidents were recorded in Scotland. That's 1 every 8 minutes. This isn't a one-off spike. Incidents rose last year, again this year, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, with many cases sadly going unreported. Behind every figure is a real-life example of a person, primarily a woman, whose life has been shattered. Survivors are sick of the same old excuses. They need real action now. So will the First Minister back my Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland bill, which gives the authorities power to intervene early and to stop abuse from happening in the first place?
First Minister.
Sir, I believe this government has taken very significant action to ensure that the perpetrators of domestic violence are brought to justice. And the increase in the number of crimes that are being reported and the number of prosecutions that are being successfully achieved is testament to the fact that the prevention of domestic abuse and the pursuing of those who perpetrate this heinous crime is taken deadly seriously within the government, and the data demonstrates how that is taken forward. So I am at one with Pam Gosal in the determination to make sure that we tackle domestic violence. Now, when it comes to, so I say all of that because of what I'm about to say, which is that the government has considered carefully the bill that Pam Gosal brings forward. We have concerns with how the proposals would work in practice, and we do not believe that the proposals in the bill are able to be supported because of the nature of those proposals and the fact that they would not provide the additional, any additional emphasis or effectiveness in the domestic abuse arrangements. We have arrangements in place which allow multi-agency public protection arrangements and the disclosure scheme for domestic abuse in Scotland, which gives people the right to ask about the background of their partner, and to Police Scotland the power to tell people that they may be at risk, even where this has not been asked for. These are very, very strong arrangements we already have in place, and we regrettably do not believe that Pam Gosal's bill will add to the effectiveness of those provisions. But I reiterate our absolute determination to do all that we can to tackle domestic abuse as a heinous crime in our society.
Question number 6, Ariane Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister to provide an update on the rollout of the £2 bus fare pilot agreed as part of the 2025 to 26 budget negotiations.
First Minister.
Sir, following an expression of interest process with our regional transport partnerships, I am pleased to confirm that we will work jointly with Hightrans and Zetrans to deliver the bus fare cap pilot. The initiative aims to make bus travel more affordable, improve access for low-income communities and support sustainable travel for people in Highland, Moray, Argyll and Bute, Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland. We look forward to progressing the phased launch of the pilot later this month, subject to finalising its design and operation.
Ariane Burgess.
I am delighted that my region of the Highlands and Islands will be the first to benefit from this new approach to affordable buses proposed and delivered by the Scottish Greens. Can the First Minister outline how this scheme will be promoted and supported to maximise uptake in these areas, and how it will contribute to reducing car dependency and cutting transport emissions as part of Scotland's climate commitments?
First Minister.
So the bus fare cap pilot is one of a range of measures the government is taking to address poverty and to support households and also to enable individuals to have the choice, the credible choice and the affordable choice of utilising public transport. So this represents a significant milestone, and it enables us to work with our partners to promote this as a means of making bus travel more affordable, to improve access for low-income communities and to support sustainable travel for people across the Hightrans and Zetrans areas. And we will, of course, learn important lessons from the application of this pilot, which has been the product of good, constructive cross-party working between the Government and the Scottish Green Party in relation to the budget, and I'm delighted to commend that today.
Question number 7, Jackie Bailey.
I ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking following reports that the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital released the wrong body for cremation.
First Minister.
Sir, I am deeply concerned by the situation and extend my sympathies to the families affected. The arrangements and requirements for caring for the deceased require that dignity and respect and the correct procedures are followed at all times. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and the Inspector of Funeral Directors are investigating the circumstances of this case, and I expect to see the outcome of this investigation shortly.
Jackie Baillie.
Can I thank the First Minister for his response? He was, of course, told of the tragic circumstances at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, where the wrong remains were sent for cremation and the devastation it has caused for 2 families. But this isn't the first incident at the hospital of this nature, and it's unfortunately not the last, with the body of a 96-year-old grandmother sent to the wrong funeral directors. Will the First Minister publish the investigation report by the Inspector of Burials, Cremations and Funeral Directors? Can he advise if that inspector's powers extend to hospital morgues, and if not, whether he agrees that the matter is reported to the police? Finally, why, when the Burial and Cremation Act was passed by this Parliament in 2016, has his government been so slow to deliver change, taking 9 years bringing forward regulations? Does he consider that that delay has let down people caught up in the funeral parlour ashes scandal that I brought to light in 2024, and now lets down those who do not have their loved ones' remains because of shocking NHS blunders?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the implementation of the Burial and Cremation Scotland Act 2016 is being taken forward, and most of the provisions are in place, and indeed there is further recruitment of individuals as part of that implementation process. In relation to this particular case, I'll explore the questions about publication of the inspectorate reports. I think it would be a good thing if it's possible, but I simply have to confirm whether there's details that would be difficult to put into the public domain. But I think it is important to do so to address the issues of public confidence, which Jackie Baillie puts to me, and which I recognise the importance of those questions. So I will explore that point and write to Jackie Baillie, but it is important there is public confidence around all of these arrangements, which must take place, and the principles of dignity and respect must be applied. And I express once again my sympathy to the families that have been affected by this terrible experience.
Sandesh Gulhani.
A declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. A few weeks ago, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow released the wrong body, which was cremated, denying 2 families a goodbye. But this is not an isolated incident. The body of 56-year-old William Patterson was released to the wrong funeral director. A mum was left in a mortuary for 6 weeks, with staff telling the family she had been forgotten. And 96-year-old Agnes Lane's remains were released to the wrong funeral firm at a time when families should be grieving. These mistakes are unacceptable, causing significant distress. With this catalogue of significant never events, what steps are being taken to hold senior management to account? And they always seem to escape scot-free.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government has in place a range of measures to tackle these issues, which the guidance is in place, which requires robust checking before any body is released from a hospital mortuary to an undertaker. We have also the Inspector of Burial, Cremation and Funeral Directors appointed by Scottish Ministers, and along with that, a statutory funeral director code of practice which regulates many of these issues. So I assure Dr Gulhani that the arrangements are in place to ensure that the highest standards are applied, that accuracy is implicit in all of the actions that are taken forward, and I give Parliament the commitment that where we can publish information in this respect, we will do so.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. Concise questions and responses will enable more opportunities. I call Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Late yesterday, the Scottish Times reported that the Scottish Government has written to the UK Government's Advocate General to inform her that, should their other legal arguments against the ruling of the Supreme Court in favour of 4 Women Scotland fail, they wish a further remedy to be explored in the form of a declaration of incompatibility on human rights grounds. At the same time, multiple statements from the First Minister and others in Cabinet have been made in this chamber that they fully accept the Supreme Court ruling and are working to implement it. Presiding Officer, I'm confused I'm not asking for comment on any legal action, but I am asking how the statements made in this chamber are compatible with the actions taken in secret by the Scottish Government.
First Minister.
President Officer, in this respect, there are live legal proceedings underway, and there will be elements of my comments that are restricted because of that fact. But what the government is doing is exactly what we told Parliament we were doing, which is taking forward the steps to ensure that we have the correct guidance arrangements in place to deal with the implications of the Supreme Court ruling. And that is the work the government is undertaking and is always undertaking in this respect.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Earlier this week, reports revealed that the A&E department at Crosshouse Hospital and NHS Ayrshire exceeded capacity by 50% this December. Staff had no choice but to care for and treat patients in corridors. Now, to be clear, this is not just a winter issue. Crosshouse A&E exceeded capacity during 7 months last year. So can the First Minister advise what progress has been made in capturing data on corridor care at both a national and local level, so that we might finally understand the true scale of this risk to staff and patients?
First Minister.
This is work that we are undertaking in collaboration with health boards around the country to ensure that we have in place sustainable arrangements in accident and emergency. But that's also part of a whole system approach which involves the role of the Scottish Ambulance Service and NHS 24, because there's an increasing proportion of patients are being supported by the Scottish Ambulance Service when they are called to either homes or businesses or other locations to avoid individuals being transported to hospitals if they can be sustainably supported in another situation. And then obviously there are a range of other sources of advice available to ensure that individuals' health needs are met. Now, I visited myself during the Christmas break the Accident and Emergency Department at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, which was operating, yes, under pressure, but it was operating in a sustainable fashion on the occasion that I was there. And there has been, in other circumstances around the country, there has been stress and challenge within the A&E system and other areas where there has been sustainable handling of the cases with which we are wrestling. But I give Carol Mockin the assurance that we are working to ensure there is a sustainable availability of services right across the country, and that will be focused on Crosshouse Hospital as much as anywhere else in the country.
Douglas Lumsden.
Sir, yesterday journalists at STV took strike action, protesting at job cuts that would lead to the end of a separate news bulletin coming from the north of Scotland. I commend and support them for taking a stand defending local journalism. So can I ask the First Minister if there is any pressure that the government can put on STV and Ofcom to help maintain a dedicated news service for the north east of Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, President, I agree entirely with Mr Lumsden about the importance of the distinctive news output and the substantive news output from STV North. There have been some amended proposals brought forward, but I stress the word substantive. I think what the alternative proposals that have emerged will lead to that erosion of substantive news output from STV North. The Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture has provided an update to Richard Leonard yesterday on his meetings with the NUJ, STV and Ofcom, and the Government has made representations to Ofcom. We've been in dialogue with STV, and I reaffirm the position that we have taken all along, that a distinctive and substantive news output from STV North is what is required, and it's what the journalists of that organisation deserve, because they do an outstanding job in reflecting those issues. And actually, the weather circumstances of the last few days have rather made the point powerfully, because the circumstances in the north of Scotland have been acutely more challenging than the rest of the country, and that's been reflected in the distinctive and substantive news coverage of STV North. So I think the recent events of recent days make Mr Lumsden's point.
Thank you, John Barr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we've just heard this week, STV journalists and production workers have been on strike in response to the proposed cuts to STV North in Aberdeen. And I know the First Minister is aware of the vital role local news plays in keeping communities informed. So does he agree that we must protect local journalism and demand the STV to think again, negotiate with its workforce and resolve this dispute to benefit both the workers and the communities they serve in the North East of Scotland?
First Minister.
In the light of these exchanges, I will make sure there are renewed representations made by the Government to STV and to Ofcom, because for all the reasons that I've put on the record today to Douglas Lumsden, and I reiterate them to my colleague Jackie Dunbar, it is important that we protect substantive and distinctive news coverage from STV North, and that's an important commitment to public service broadcasting in Scotland.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Tuesday, I asked the First Minister what help could be given to the North and North East during this period of extreme weather in the face of severe council budget challenges. Since then, the situation has worsened, with further falls overnight and ice everywhere. Now, Tim Eagle MSP has suggested the Government coordinate resource sharing between councils, and Andrew Bowie MP has suggested calling out the military. Is the First Minister sympathetic to these solutions, and in any event, what further support can the Government offer to help the people of the North and North East during this extreme weather?
First Minister.
As I acknowledged on Tuesday, I recognise the severity of the issues that have been wrestled with, principally in the North East, but also in the Highlands, the Northern Isles and in the Western Isles. Now, we have had, at some time since Friday, an amber warning in place Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday and Tuesday in these areas. So the situation has been very acute. Now, the dialogue that's taken place with local resilience partnerships has resulted in the making available of snow clearing equipment by AME, the Trunk Roads Network Company, to Aberdeenshire Council. So there has been a mutual aid arrangement put in place, and other local authorities have been part of putting in place mutual aid because of the severity of the conditions in the North East. Now, no agency has requested additional support from either the Scottish Government or the Ministry of Defence beyond those arrangements, but we are in constant contact with the resilience partnerships in the North East. We had an extensive further follow-up discussion on Tuesday evening, specifically with Aberdeenshire Council and on behalf of the Resilience Partnership, and we've been working closely with local authorities and health boards. But I assure Mr Kerr that we are in active dialogue to identify if there is any other additional practical assistance that can be offered. The last point I would make is that we're now in a period where there is a relaxation of the intensity of the weather, so the ability to apply measures to recover the situation is a greater opportunity in the absence of amber warnings, and that will be the priority for the next few days.
Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister has said that he cannot see how international law has been respected by the United States in its military intervention in Venezuela, and has said that the international community must now ensure that de-escalation, diplomacy and democracy follow. While it is the case that defence is a matter reserved to the UK Government, Wick John O'Groats Airport is Scottish Government owned, so reports that it is being used to support US military operations in relation to Venezuela are alarming. So can I ask whether the First Minister was made aware of the intention to use this airport to support yesterday's action, and given his expressed views, what assurance can he give to my constituents in the North East that their Scottish Government-owned infrastructure is not being used as a staging post to violate international law?
First Minister.
I think we've got to be really careful here about the different issues that are at stake here. The comments that I made at the start of this week about the situation in Venezuela are a matter of the public record, and I reaffirm those comments today. I believe in the international rules-based system, but having listened carefully to what has been said by the United States administration, I cannot see how international law has been respected in that case. Now, that is one circumstance. There is another circumstance, which is the incident involving the tanker. Now, I have, and the Government has, no knowledge as to whether or not aircraft that landed at Wick Airport on the morning of the 7th of January, yesterday, were involved in that initiative. We have no knowledge of whether that is the case or not. What I can tell Parliament, for transparency, is that Wick Airport is regularly used by aircraft to refuel to enable them to make journeys across the Atlantic and into the Arctic areas. That has been a long-standing part of activity, but Hans Hans Airports Limited do not scrutinise the basis on which any requests for landing are made in these circumstances. But I stress the Government and Hans Hans Airports do not have any knowledge of whether the aircraft that landed yesterday were used in the US-UK operation against the Russian tanker. And I conclude by saying two things. Firstly, that this is, of course, a matter that is reserved to the United Kingdom Government. And secondly, where sanctions are applied, and if they're applied in relation to Russia, I am a firm supporter of those sanctions being enforced, because there is no point in applying sanctions to governments that ignore international law, that undermine the rule of law, that invade independent countries in the way that Russia has invaded Ukraine without taking action where those sanctions are applied. And on that point of principle, I'm happy to set out the Scottish Government's position.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' debate in the name of Claire Baker, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19504 in the name of Claire Baker on non-fatal strangulation laws and intimate partner homicides. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Claire Baker to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank the members who signed my motions that could be debated today. I would particularly like to thank Tess White and Michelle Thompson, who I've worked with to raise the profile of non-fatal strangulation. And as both members have indicated that they are not seeking re-election, I wish to recognise their commitment to fighting violence against women and girls in Scotland. I look forward to hearing their contributions and others from across the chamber this afternoon. At the outset, I want to commend the researchers whose work has prompted this debate. Led by Professors Sonia Offis and Clement Quintana Dominique of the University of Exeter, the research on intimate partner homicide and non-fatal strangulation is not only academically rigorous but profoundly human in its implications. Their work has brought new evidence into focus, and it gives renewed urgency to this discussion. Non-fatal strangulation is not a new concern. It is an issue that I and others have been raising in this Parliament for a number of years, with successive Justice Secretaries and First Ministers, as well as in debates and questions. The normalisation of non-fatal strangulation driven by pornography should be challenged. I welcome the intention of the Online Safety Act to outlaw choking and online pornography, making it a priority offence. The Institute for Addressing Strangulation has carried out 2 surveys, and in less than a year, of those aged 16 to 34 who reported being choked during sex, saw an increase from 35% to 51% of people. While 70% of people said that consent was established before choking and 38% reported that they enjoyed it, 27% said there was no consent and 36% felt scared by the action. While the focus of today's debate is the research which seeks to strengthen the legal framework, we do have to recognise the IFS research, which shows that 29% think there are safe ways to strangle, 38% enjoy it, and 18% think it's a normal part of sex. We can legislate more, but that won't necessarily stop non-fatal strangulation in intimate relationships. Non-fatal strangulation is not risk-free. It can cause serious internal injury, brain damage or loss of consciousness within seconds. It can cause incontinence, coughing, neck pain, confusion and can lead to anxiety and depression. But it may not leave visible marks, and that absence of visible injury can affect how incidences are recorded, investigated or prosecuted. It can be used as a tool of control and coercion, and survivors describe how terrifying the experience can be, not only because of the physical danger, but also because of what it represents, an assertion of total control over breath, over consciousness, over life. As a Parliament and as a society, are we prepared to challenge the normalisation of strangulation within sexual relationships, and what are we going to do about it? In 2019, research for BBC Radio 5 Live found that a third of women under 40 had experienced unwanted slapping, choking, gagging or spitting during consensual sex, with the Centre for Women's Justice said the findings showed the growing pressure on young women to consent to violent, dangerous and demeaning acts. I have pressed the Scottish Government to undertake research into the normalisation of violence and sexual activity, including choking, reflecting the evidence and unease that acts carry a high risk of serious harm are being continually framed as routine or expected. In Scotland, there should be a multidisciplinary approach which encompasses public health, education and justice. It would appear that that is not the case, and that there is very little recognition of the prevalence of this practice and its consequences. Non-fatal strangulation in intimate partner relationships is too often minimised, misunderstood or treated as a lesser form of assault. But the evidence being presented today does often recognise it as a strong predictor of future lethal violence. Consent does not exist in a vacuum, and where there is fear, coercion, power imbalance and risk of serious harm, the concept of consent becomes problematic. The survey shows that people consent to being strangled or strangling others because their partner enjoys it, not necessarily because they enjoy it. Treating strangulation as normal, mutual or harmless risks obscuring abuse and silencing victims. The research highlighted in today's motion reinforces why this matters. It is the first known international study to examine the impact of standalone non-fatal strangulation laws on intimate partner homicide rates across multiple jurisdictions, and its findings are striking. In US states where non-fatal strangulation has been criminalised as a distinct serious offence, intimate partner homicides fell by double-digit percentages. Female victim homicides declined by around 14% and male victim homicides fell by 27%. The researchers estimate that more than 1,500 lives have been saved as a result of these laws. These represent people, overwhelmingly, though not exclusively women, who are alive today because earlier intimate relationship violence was recognised, taken seriously and interrupted before it escalated into something fatal. They suggest that when the law clearly recognises non-fatal strangulation as a serious, dangerous and criminal in its own right, it can disrupt patterns of escalation and coercive control. Scotland has made important progress in recognising domestic abuse as a pattern of behaviour, not a series of isolated incidents. But the evidence raises a legitimate and pressing question. Does our current law sufficiently recognise non-fatal strangulation within that framework, or is there a gap that leaves victims at risk? We should examine whether our existing offences adequately capture the harm, the risk and the intent associated with non-fatal strangulation. In a previous meeting that myself and Tess White sponsored, the Office of the Procurator Fiscal set out the argument that you can't consent to harm in Scotland, and so the offence already exists. I accepted this and I would be reluctant to legislate unnecessarily. However, the research from the University of Exeter does add more weight to the calls for a standalone offence. If criminalising non-fatal strangulation as a standalone offence could help prevent escalation, improve recording and prosecution and ultimately save lives, then I believe this Parliament has a responsibility to consider it. We should engage seriously with the evidence before us and ask whether our existing offences capture the reality of harm, risk and intent associated with strangulation, particularly when there are no visible injuries and no weapon. I want to close by acknowledging the survivors and advocacy organisations who have long highlighted non-fatal strangulation as a critical issue. They are often sharing their lived experience at a time when it is unfashionable to challenge this culture, and there's a minimisation of the experience that being strangled can be terrifying, life-threatening and never minor. This debate reflects a conversation that has been building in this chamber for a few years, and I hope it marks the point at which we move from recognising the problem to actively exploring solutions, which should be grounded in evidence, informed by survivors and driven by the shared aim of preventing a further loss of life. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you, Ms Baker. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Michelle Thompson to be followed by Tess White. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too thank Claire Baker for her work in this matter and obtaining this debate, and accord my own respects to the power of collaborative cross-party working. Today I want to speak a little bit more. Hang on, my machine is having a little wobbly. I want to speak a little bit more about the research paper Disrupting Violence, Protecting Lives, Strangulation Laws and Intimate Partner Homicides. It's very compelling and it shows beyond reasonable doubt that treating non-fatal strangulation as a standalone criminal offence saves lives. The paper analyses nearly 30 years of data linking non-fatal strangulation laws across the United States with detailed homicide statistics. And the researchers show that where non-fatal strangulation laws were introduced, intimate partner homicides fell dramatically. Among adults aged 18 to 49, the age group most affected, US states saw a 14% reduction in female intimate partner homicide and a 27% reduction in male intimate partner homicide, compared to with what would have otherwise occurred. So these are not modelling assumptions or advocacy claims. They are causal effects derived from a rigorous two-stage difference in differences methodology. And the study goes further. It finds no similar reductions in killings by strangers, which tells us that the laws did not simply coincide with wider crime declines. Instead, the drop is specific, targeted and clearly linked to non-fatal strangulation legislation. Why do we care? We care because non-fatal strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of later homicide. We know it often leaves little visible injury. Historically, it's been treated as a simple assault. And the research explains that this legal vacuum had fatal consequences. Victims would be nearly killed, yet police could often charge only a minor offence. And this, of course, had the effect of weakening justice responses and sending the wrong messages to perpetrators and left the victims exposed. So where laws were introduced, things change. And the study shows that police classify more intimate partner violence cases as aggravated assault, and arrest rates for aggravated IPV increase, especially for the women most exposed. In other words, the law empowers earlier, stronger intervention, breaking the pathway from non-fatal strangulation to homicide. So, Presiding Officer, the evidence is clear. A standalone non-fatal strangulation offence saves lives. And we know in Scotland we do not yet have such an offence. And I know that the Scottish Government has stated that it doesn't believe a standalone offence is necessary at this time, making various arguments around existing assault and attempted murder laws and so on. And I know also that ministers have said they'll keep the matter under review, but I believe the current legal framework is insufficient. And although we may introduce additional legislative complexity, we will also improve outcomes. Fundamentally, the evidence before us shows that general assault laws do not deliver the same prevention effect. It is the specificity of the offence, the formal legal recognition of strangulation as a distinct high-risk act, that enables justice systems elsewhere to intervene earlier and more effectively. So, Presiding Officer, the Government states it's committed to reducing violence against women and girls. But on this matter, the evidence now goes beyond principle. It is empirical. So the question for us now is simple. If we know an action proven by this research can prevent homicides, why would we wait? I believe it's time for us to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. I call Tess White to be followed by Cara Mockin. Ms White.
Special thanks to Claire Baker for raising this petition. Thank you. And also to Michelle Thompson for working on this topic over the last few years. Emily Drouet was in her first year of university when she met a boy who would go on to become her boyfriend, to strangle her, to engage in such demoralisation of her as a person that in 2016 she committed suicide. Presiding Officer, Scotland is the only part of the UK that does not have non-fatal strangulation as a standalone crime. I pay tribute to Fiona Drouet for her dedication and persistence in progressing her petition on non-fatal strangulation, to Byra's Place for their insightful cross-party event with leading experts. Strangulation for sexual purposes is now part of our culture, and it's especially common in the young. Research has shown that 43% of sexually active 16 and 17-year-olds have experienced it. 35% of 16 to 34-year-olds. What was niche has now become part of the mainstream via increasingly extreme pornography. This issue has crept up on society unnoticed, with unthinkable consequences. Strangulation is a strong predictor, as we've heard today, of escalating domestic abuse and intimate harm. 1 in 4 women accessing community and refuge services in this country reported they had experienced strangulation or suffocation, yet strangulation often leaves no visible physical injury, making it difficult to assess and prosecute under existing common law assault offences. The First Minister has said he needs the gap in the law proven for this to be made a standalone crime. But is the data on NFS actually collected in Scotland? Markers are being added to crimes if NFS has taken place, but since not always reported, there is always going to be underreporting. Many women, Presiding Officer, are reluctant to come forward. A standalone crime would enable awareness and data collection for women to report it to the police. But data is collected in many countries, and a research report published in December 2025 from the University of Exeter has found that a NFS law may have prevented 1,029 female intimate partner homicides. Crucially, it stops perpetrators before violence turns deadly. And as we've heard today, researchers Professor Sonia Orifice and Clement Quintana-Domecq say laws that explicitly define and criminalise non-fatal strangulation are scalable and actionable policy tool for preventing lethal acts of domestic violence. Our findings show how laws can be designed to shift enforcement earlier in the violence cycle and meaningfully enhance victim safety. Fiona Drouet, in reply to the Lord Advocate rejection of a standalone NFS crime, said, "A specific law would reinforce to health professionals, educators and frontline responders that this behaviour is a red flag for escalating harm, including homicide and suicide. It would also," she said, "support victims in recognising the seriousness of their experiences and empower them to seek help." Presiding Officer, in closing, Emily Drouet was caught in the gap where the law should have been. In her name and so many others, it's time for non-fatal strangulation to be made a standalone crime in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. I now call Cara Mochan to be followed by Liam Kerr. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Claire Baker for bringing this important debate to the Chamber and for all those who have contributed so far. Can I also associate myself with the remarks made by everybody about how important the cross-party working is, particularly in this area, and of course also the quality of the research, limited research in this area, but the quality is so important. Today's motion asks Parliament to recognise and consider the benefits of creating a standalone offence for non-fatal strangulation, which in my view could see significant improvements to public awareness, to data collection and victim safety and support. Non-fatal strangulation is a severe form of domestic abuse, which is predominantly carried out by men against women. It can have serious and long-term side effects, as we've heard, including brain damage, organ failure and mental health issues, and has potentially life-threatening consequences and cause extreme trauma for victims. And Tess White's contribution just shows us the shocking reality of this and why we have to highlight it. As highlighted in the motion, non-fatal strangulation often leaves no visible injuries, but it is a strong predictor of future lethal violence, and is becoming increasingly more common, as we've heard, and particularly we've heard from other contributors in younger people who may not fully understand the consequences of this. While non-fatal strangulation is prosecuted as a criminal offence in Scotland under the common law of assault, as we've already heard, the common law route for prosecution does not always work. It can fall short in fully capturing the offence. And I believe that exploring how and where improvements can be made may significantly improve outcomes for victims. I think that is very important. That if we don't fully capture it, we can actually get improvements. I want to, though, of course, recognise the bold and world-leading action that the Parliament has taken to tackle violence against women and girls here in this Parliament. And I think that has been because we do work cross-party and listen to each other. So that, I think, we should have on the record. As non-fatal strangulation is currently recorded under a range of offences, as we've heard, there is an issue with recording of data and a lack of data. And I think that is quite an important element. I don't think I need to explain just how important data is, not only to understand the scale of the problem and to increase awareness, but also, medically, as I said earlier, capturing and recording that data on strangulation is important for us to, get research and change the impacts, but individually for the victim at that point of being a victim, if they present in hospital. So it's very important that we get the data right. I think it also will help us to increase the public awareness of the dangers. There is a strong case made that a standalone law would improve education and awareness of the effects of strangulation and could help improve the long-term safety and well-being of those victims that we're talking about. Underreporting is such an issue, and so a standalone law might help us to address this if people really understood what it is that we were trying to record. I of course recognise the arguments. I was also at the round table that Claire Baker mentioned about those cautioning against introducing a standalone offence and the potential unintentional consequences. But there is also a concern that looking for a quicker alternative approach might not be as effective and may fall short in addressing the core problems. Tackling violence against women and girls must and should always be a priority here in the Parliament, and so therefore, in my view, it is absolutely worth exploring creating a standalone offence, because it could send a message. It's important for Scotland that we see this as our absolute priority. Can I thank Claire Baker and everybody for their contributions again today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I call Liam Kerr to be followed by Pauline McNeill. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Emily Drouet was a law student at Aberdeen University. Kind, compassionate, intelligent and thoughtful, Emily died in 2016 when, An incident occurred following a pattern of abuse by her boyfriend, Angus Milligan. An incident initially treated as non-suspicious. It later emerged she had reported an earlier assault to the university, which included strangulation. At the time, non-fatal strangulation was poorly understood. It was often characterised as a minor assault, and police and medical professionals failed to recognise strangulation as a high-risk indicator of homicide. But we know from this report, the study referenced and the powerful motion today, that non-fatal strangulation is incredibly serious. It can directly cause internal injuries, brain injury, hypoxia. It carries a high risk of delayed death and is one of the strongest predictors of future lethal violence. And that's why the Emily Test campaign was set up, to demand that strangulation should always trigger an urgent medical response and enhanced police safeguarding, even where the victim appears outwardly unharmed. And also to be one of the many calls for non-fatal strangulation to be a standalone offence, like it has been in England and Wales since 2022 and Northern Ireland since 2023. Because it is certainly arguable that the absence of such an offence means police and prosecutors lack a clear legal category, that data collection on incidents is poor, that the seriousness of strangulation may not be sufficiently recognised or deterred, and that public awareness of the life-threatening nature of strangulation remains low. And although Police Scotland and the Crown Office recognise strangulation as a red flag for homicide risk now, absent such an offence, there is no statutory requirement that every report of strangulation should trigger an immediate medical assessment, specialist medical imaging, or specific risk or safeguarding reviews. Now, from the start, the Emily Test campaign, which can be found on emilytest.org if anyone watching is impacted or concerned from what they're hearing today, the campaign demanded action, setting out clear and articulate deliverables through means including a petition for a standalone criminal offence. And here's my biggest concern. The Petitions Committee considered that last April. The Criminal Justice Committee then examined it last summer. The Scottish Government's programme for government stated that it would carry out a comprehensive assessment of the law to determine if further action is needed. The Cabinet Secretary updated the Justice Committee in November, saying that there would be that comprehensive assessment. And the Lord Advocate wrote to Fiona Drouet, who joins us in the gallery today, in December, acknowledging the concern, explaining the current position, but giving no firm direction forward. And here we are, 11 weeks from the dissolution of this Parliament and all that that entails. And the overwhelming impression is that this issue is not being prioritised sufficiently. Nearly a decade on from Emily's tragic death, the campaign tell me they have yet to see tangible progress. So thanks to Claire Baker's motion, and the report which prompted it, and all who contributed their time and expertise to it, the Minister has the chance, in closing today, to set out exactly what will be done to address this before May's election. She must not countenance any delays. We have a duty. We owe it to Emily and all those impacted by this vicious practice of non-fatal strangulation. Close the gaps, act now, and make sure no woman becomes another victim of this appalling violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Pauline McNeill to be followed by Monica Lennon. Ms McNeill.
Thank you to Claire Baker for bringing this motion and for taking this on in this Parliament. And to Tess White and Michelle Thompson, I just want to endorse the words of Claire Baker, that the work that Tess White and Michelle Thompson have done in violence against women is very notable in this Parliament and should be recognised. I was shocked to read that more than 20,000 victims in the UK experience strangulation every year, and I also attended the briefing that Claire hosted the Women's Support Project and Bearis Place, and it opened my eyes to something I knew very little about at the time. But it also alarmed me to learn that children were present in more than 1/3 of non-fetal strangulation offences, according to the UK's Crown Prosecution Service. I found that quite staggering. But what I learned at the briefing that was hosted by Claire Baker and others is that the timeline of being strangled goes like this. In 6.8 seconds, it's time to render you unconscious. In 14 seconds, it's anoxic seizure. And in 15 seconds, loss of bladder control. And only 30 seconds, loss of bowel control. And I know many others are talking about it leading to a fatality. It takes only 62 seconds before this could potentially happen. So it's clear from this timeline why non-fatal strangulation often occurs at the most dangerous stage of the escalation of violence associated with later homicide. I've been particularly concerned to read about the normalisation. Other members have talked about what's happening regarding non-fatal strangulation, often known as choking, in young people's sexual habits. Strangulation has seeped into popular culture and social media, and there are even reports that it's been mentioned as a sexual preference on dating apps. So I believe we must act to prevent this by educating both men and women about the consequences. There have been reports that sex education providers and teachers are saying that they have been asked by children in school about how to safely choke a partner. Needless to say, there is no way to safely do something like this. I think someone already mentioned that the study found that 43% of sexually active 16 and 17-year-olds in the UK had experienced this. Pornography is cited as the most common way that young people learn about strangulation. I think addressing the harms of extreme pornography must be central to our work in violence against women and girls. And if we are to address violence against women and girls in the future, we need to confront this issue at the earliest opportunity, and especially with children, to counter these damaging portrayals. We need to be clear that violent pornography normalises harm to women and girls. I was pleased to see the amendments to the UK Crime and Policing Bill that criminalise possessing and publishing depictions of strangulation or suffocation in pornography, with duties and platforms to study the proliferation of these images. But to address the question of whether we should legislate or not, the current framework of non-fatal strangulation incidents are mainly treated as assault, which is defined under the common law as an attack on another person with evil intent. Penalties can range up to life imprisonment. Prosecutors do not require to prove visible injury or harm to secure an assault for a conviction, provided the act was intentional. But as others have said, there are challenges in tracking how prevalent this is, because there's no specific standalone crime, and there is currently no individual marking system to accurately count or monitor these cases across Scotland. So I think it is worth exploring, Carol Mockin talked about this, exploring whether or not data could be collated at Crown Office, at least to give us an accurate picture of the scale of the problem. Incidentally, it hasn't been mentioned in this debate, but raised with members of this Parliament, the act of stealthing, which is the intentional act of secretly removing a condom or another barrier method without consent, is also being prosecuted in our courts, and it's not a stand-alone crime. But we cannot rule it out. We have a different legal system in Scotland in relation to England, so we have more flexibility in the law, but it shouldn't be ruled out. But I do think it should be part of the 2026 new Parliament's work, and should form part of the strategy on the government of the day, whoever they may be, on their work on violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. And I call Monica Lennon. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Claire Baker for securing this important debate, and to all colleagues for their contributions today, particularly to Tess White and Michelle Thompson, who have actively worked on a cross-party basis to combat violence against women and girls, a subject that is close to my own heart, but I know is important to all of us. I want to add my voice to the debate today to support calls for the creation of a standalone offence of non-fatal strangulation. We cannot ignore the growing trend of sexual strangulation that is being normalised to a large extent by pornography and harmful so-called influencers who are really taking us back backwards in so many respects in society. And we cannot ignore this because of the link between intimate partner homicides and non-fatal strangulation. We need action to reduce this violence, to prevent harm, and, as we've heard powerfully from so many colleagues today, to save lives. We stand here today with more research and more knowledge than ever before. Thankfully, this research that others have touched on covers multiple jurisdictions internationally, so we're not just looking at a Scottish or a UK context. Like colleagues, I want to pay tribute to Fiona Drury, who courageously is with us today in the gallery, and to pay tribute to Emily Test for the fantastic work across the spectrum of gender-based violence that we must tackle. And I say that not just as a politician, but also as a mother who now can sleep a little bit better at night knowing that my daughter is studying in an institution that is fully signed up to the Emily Test Charter. When Fiona and I met to discuss this work at South Lanarkshire College, again another institution that is in my parliamentary region, it just gives that extra bit of peace of mind that there is that discussion happening in our colleges or universities. But we need to do much more, and I think we all recognise that it isn't down to one minister or one department or one agency. Just like we're showing cross-party working in here today, this needs to be a partnership-wide approach. I won't talk about the really worrying statistics because I think they've been covered, although really alarmed to read the Institute for Addressing Strangulation report that it's the age of 18 to 20 is the most common age where respondents report first starting to strangle others or to be strangled. What I did notice in preparing for today is that just in December of 2025, there was a big conference in Lancashire. Ministers may know about it, but that brought together key stakeholders to really shine a spotlight on non-fatal strangulation. And if you don't know about it, Ministers, it's maybe something to look at. It'd be good to see something similar happen in Scotland, if nothing like that is already planned. And what are the public health messages that we can get out there? The mission of Emily Test is to ensure that no other student ends up in Emily's shoes. And that sits in my heart today as we, I think, bring our remarks to a close before we hear from the Minister that, yes, we can look at the data, we can look at the legal arguments, but we know that it's these human stories that really do have impact and change behaviours. So I hope by speaking today that I put on record my support for the motion that went to public petitions, the motion today, and that we can all work together to work with the Scottish Government to get the change that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. And I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And firstly, I want to thank Claire Baker for bringing this important issue of non-fatal strangulation to the Chamber today. I've certainly had the opportunity over the last few years to engage with Ms Baker on this matter, and that has certainly led to further Scottish Government activity in terms of exploring solutions, and I will come to that later in my remarks. Secondly, I also want to acknowledge the contributions of Michelle Thompson, Tess White, Carol Mockin, Liam Kerr, Polly McNeill and Monica Lennon in today's debate. But principally, I do also wish to pay tribute to survivors and also the researchers, as well as Fiona Drury, who I've also had the pleasure of meeting. And we should also acknowledge the work done by 2 parliamentary committees in terms of the Petitions Committee and the evidence that the Criminal Justice Committee took in and around this debate. I think we are all horrified by the scale of this issue, and as many speakers have acknowledged today, non-fatal strangulation is extremely harmful. Choking reduces the flow of oxygen and can therefore cause damage to the brain as well as to the windpipe. And alongside the physical risks, anxiety, depression, loneliness are often associated with experiencing non-fatal strangulation. And non-fatal strangulation is also used mainly by men to exert coercive control within relationships. Claire Baker spoke of that total control that some men seek. And there is evidence, again, that others have acknowledged, that those men are also more likely to carry out severe violence. And a few speakers today have spoke about how non-fatal strangulation is indeed a red flag. Presiding Officer, last month Parliament debated 16 days of activism highlighting men's violence against women and girls. And as many of us have acknowledged today, Scotland does have world-renowned domestic abuse legislation which addresses the dynamics of coercive and controlling behaviour. Yes, I will, of course.
Tess White.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for taking an intervention. I hear what you say, and I'm glad you've referenced the Criminal Justice Committee. But has the Cabinet Secretary reviewed the latest evidence from December, where the professors looked at the US, which introduced non-fatal strangulation as a standalone crime, state by state by state? And the evidence is clear that they demonstrated there was a clear correlation that creating it as a standalone crime did actually reduce deaths. And I think the reason for the debate today is because of that compelling evidence. And if the Cabinet Secretary hasn't reviewed the data with the professors, will she?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware of that evidence. Claire Baker, in her opening remarks, spoke about the importance of us all to engage with the evidence. What I will do later in my remarks, I will reflect on the current position in Scotland in terms of Scots law and some of the concerns that have been obliquely referenced by speakers, but also to outline the action that the Scottish Government does take forward, because we don't have a closed mind on this issue, although given some of the evidence that came to the Criminal Justice Committee, I think there are aspects that do need to be considered and considered further. The first point I wanted to acknowledge, Presiding Officer, in terms of what else needs done, is that I do acknowledge that it is clearly very important that we have the means to identify cases of non-fatal strangulation in order to address this aspect of abuse of women and girls. And I know that everyone in this chamber is committed to taking whatever action is needed to address such abuse. And that, of course, includes societal and cultural change to address the factors that risk normalising this behaviour. For example, we have agreed the new offences in the UK Crime and Policing Bill criminalising pornography featuring strangulation or suffocation, and that will extend to Scotland if passed. I also welcome updated NHS Inform web pages which include clear information on non-fatal strangulation, highlighting that there is no safe way to be strangled and that it is a criminal offence to cause harm through strangulation. Presiding Officer, if I can now turn to the proposal for a stand-alone offence. Of course, briefly.
Grateful before the Cabinet moves on to the next point. I appreciate the efforts that are being made, and NHS Form website is always worth a visit, but I'm just not sure we're getting a huge number of 16, 17, 18-year-olds going there. So given that we have this growing trend, which is worrying all of us, what more can government do to get out the message there is no safe way to strangle or be strangled? How do we get this into our classrooms, get it out onto social media in a more positive way? What other levers can government pull that we can support government with?
Cabinet Secretary.
Ms Lennon raises an important point. So the work that goes on in schools in terms of equally safe and the curriculum input in regards to healthy relationships, which of course focuses a lot these days on the importance of consent. But I will pick up further on this issue in terms of the consultation that we will be taking forward, but also the survey information that Ms Baker and I have engaged on as well, and the point about online harms, and particularly in relation to intimate images, will be a factor in terms of the forthcoming consultation. In terms of the standalone offence, just by way of background, Presiding Officer, I know that members are aware that the UK Parliament has legislated for a specific offence of non-fatal strangulation in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. I think it is important to recognise that this was mainly to address a very specific issue in those jurisdictions where non-fatal strangulation that did not result in visible injury could only be prosecuted using the statutory offence of common assault, carrying a maximum penalty of 6 months' imprisonment. And understandably, that was something that those jurisdictions wished to address. Now, in terms of Scots law, as it currently stands, I do wish to reiterate that non-fatal strangulation is already criminal in Scotland and can be dealt with using a range of offences. And I do think that is an important message to reiterate. It doesn't mean that minds are closed or that there isn't further action to take forward. But in terms of Ms Lennon's point about education and giving out those correct societal messages, it's important to be clear that non-fatal strangulation is already a criminal offence. And this includes, the offences include common law assault with penalties up to life imprisonment, sexual assault with penalties up to life imprisonment, and part of a course of conduct prosecuted as a domestic abuse offence with penalties up to 14 years imprisonment. Now, the Crown Office, as independent prosecutors, are clear they approach non-fatal strangulation seriously and that they use these laws where the evidence supports it. Another important factor, Presiding Officer, is that in contrast with the law in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it is important to note that in Scotland there is no defence of consent to strangulation. And that is a significant feature on how Scots law offers better protection. And again, that is an important message to get out to our society and communities, that there is no defence of consent to strangulation. While I understand and respect deeply the views that creating a specific offence could send a message about the unacceptability of non-fatal strangulation, and could help measure its prevalence, and actually recognise that these are important factors and they are powerful factors and they're, by their very nature, powerful arguments. What I want to guard against is any risk of unintended consequences. And I say this in light of the evidence highlighted by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and their evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee last year for a specific offence as distinct from assault, because there would need to be corroboration specifically of the strangulation and not simply the assault or domestic abuse. And we've already heard from members today that one of the salient issues with non-fatal strangulation is that it often leaves no visible signs. Yet the concerns raised by the Crown Office is that in relation to a specific offence that corroboration would still be required. And this may mean, and I say may mean, that creating a specific offence would in fact underestimate the true prevalence, as cases involving non-fatal strangulation might continue to be prosecuted as assault, sexual assault or domestic abuse. Presiding Officer, I do wish to stress that this is an issue that I and this Government take seriously. Whilst existing laws operate well in protecting victims and dealing with perpetrators, nonetheless, we will shortly publish a public consultation to seek views on this area of law as set out in our programme of government, and again to continue to engage with views, but also to engage with the evidence. That consultation will also, as I mentioned, include looking at online harms, particularly in relation to intimate images, but also spiking and statutory aggravation offences against pregnant women, and the prosecutorial powers to impose non-harassment.
Cabinet Secretary, I appreciate there's a lot of information to impart on this very, very important matter, but you are really quite considerably over your time. Thank you.
Sorry, Anne, forgive me. Forgive me.
No, I'm afraid there isn't, because we're running fairly late now.
Okay. So, Presiding Officer, I agree with the sentiment that's in the motion that non-fatal strangulation should not go unrecorded. I've spoke in detail about the consultation, and my final piece of information for Parliament, Presiding Officer, is as a result of the engagement with Ms Baker, is that alongside the consultation on data collection in the justice system, the 25-26 Scottish Crime and Justice Survey also includes, for the first time, questions in relation to non-fatal strangulation, and that fieldwork is due to finish in March this year, and initial results are expected to be included in the 26-27 main findings report. So if I can just conclude, Presiding Officer, by thanking members for their contribution, and this is an issue, a serious issue that as a government will continue to engage in.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m. Thank you.